music can have that, but he ain't gotta show it, cause with or without it, he still gangsta.
Ago, Tupac probably did it for you, or DMX might have did it for you. You know what I'm saying?
I watched him do it for decades, right? So now I feel like I can spot talent when I see.
Bun B is not just a legend, he is considered the impenetrable fortress of Southern rap. He is the standard, the measure of temperament, of ability, of the kind of prestige that no young artist can fake. Even Jay-Z or Outkast have to bow down in respect. But behind the calm demeanor of a hip-hop professor lie dark cracks that no one dares to mention. The man who was robbed at gunpoint had his home broken into right in front of his wife. The artist had to live with the psychological scars after the sudden death of his best friend, and the restaurant owner was attacked in the parking lot and nearly lost his life. The most heartbreaking thing is that this living icon had to witness the greatest loss just as their career was shining brightly. What made Bun B be treated like a criminal who needed to be dealt with root and branch? Who is the person behind the lurking footsteps in the shadows following him as if hunting a dangerous target? And was that break-in just an accident or a warning? Stay tuned until the end, because what's about to be revealed will blow your mind so much that you'll have to rewind to make sure you didn't hear wrong. One Bun B from Port Arthur's golden boy to unexpected fall. Bun B, whose real name is Bernard James Freeman, was born on March 19, 1973. He was born in Houston, but his childhood was framed by Port Arthur, an oil and gas town where the sky was always hazy with smoke and the sounds of engines running day and night became the backdrop for children growing up on the Gulf Coast. My father worked in a refinery. My mother was an elementary school teacher, a model family in the strictest sense. At the Freeman house, there's no room for laziness, and discipline isn't a wall slogan. It's a way of life ingrained in their bones and blood. Looking back later, Bun B often says that it was that strictness that forged the backbone he carried with him for 3 decades in the rap game. But if discipline is the framework, then music is the breath within that house. The Freeman family listened to soul, blues, funk, and gospel, the sounds Southerners used to soothe their fatigue after a day's work. And in that same house, the youngest child affectionately called Bunny, then Bunny B, and finally shortened to Bun B, a name that started as a playful nickname but became a lifelong legacy. However, he did not inherit his parents' ability to learn. Bernard realized early on that he wasn't the type of student who could sit still at a desk. Musical notes, vocal runs, drum beats captivated him more than any math problem or essay. Once, instead of going to class, he went to the park with his friends, stood on a wooden table, and freestyle rapped for a few dozen children around him. The feeling of being listened to made his heart beat faster than any class ever had. But that feeling didn't last long. His mother found him, brought him home, and locked him in his room for a whole day for daring to skip school. Port Arthur in the 1980s was not a place for big dreams. It's a land that forces a child to grow up faster than their years. Violence, poverty. The streets aren't wide enough to dream. But it was at Abraham Lincoln High School that Bun met Chad Butler, Pimp C. The two of them looked at each other and realized in this town as small as a hand, they were the rare ones who dared to dream big. Before UGK became Underground Kings, they were just 2 young men trying to escape the cycle of poverty, study, work, grow old. Then hip-hop found Bun B like a door that unexpectedly opened. The first time he heard Rapper's Delight, he was stunned. People were talking instead of singing. A punch to the consciousness. It turns out there's a language for all the things you don't dare to say. Africa Bambata Zulu Nation showed me that hip-hop isn't just radio entertainment. It's culture, a way for forgotten children to reclaim their existence. And from that moment on, Bernard Freeman, the boy living in the shadow of the factories, began his journey from nothing. A long and arduous journey to prove to his parents that he could live with his passion. 2. From unknown to hip-hop ruler. Pimp C and Bun B met when they were just children struggling and knowing nothing about the word music. A person as fiery as fire, every word they spoke was like hitting a Texas drum beat straight into the air. A person who is calm and sharp with each word as solid as a nail driven into the beat. 2 contrasting personalities, but when they stand side by side, the audience feels like 2 explosions beating in unison, a rhythm that anyone who looks back calls the destiny of the South. From bedroom practices, a cheap cassette player, and a rickety speaker system, they formed 4 black ministers, and then feeling more confident and daring, renamed themselves UGK. They didn't know how far they would go. They only knew one thing: their music had to be real. It had to sound like the breath of Port Arthur. The bygone era of Southern rap began the very moment they chose not to imitate anyone. Ridin' Dirty is that statement. An album with the smell of Texas asphalt bass like truck engines on Highway 59. Stories that are unpolished but so vivid that listeners feel like they can see the entire region through each rap line. Then, Big Pimpin' emerged as the biggest push in their career history. Jay-Z brought UGK to the national stage. Americans are looking back at Southern rap for the first time, not with pity, but with admiration. Anyone who lived through that period surely remembers the surge of pride they felt seeing the 2 young men from Port Arthur standing next to Jay-Z, not at all overshadowed or nervous, as if they had always belonged on that stage. But life always has an unexpected twist. In 2002, Pimp C was arrested for brandishing a gun in a mall. A moment of anger led to a long sentence. For Bun B, it wasn't just a scandal. It's the sprinkle of a shared dream. UGK was left hanging like a door slammed shut in the faces of the 2 who had just reached the mainstream threshold. After years of building, Bun B is now the only one left keeping the UGK name alive. He threw himself into every feature from Houston to Atlanta, from underground to radio, not to become famous, but so people wouldn't forget who UGK was. In 2006, Pimp C was released early. But before the joy could fully bloom, December 2007 cut it short. Pimp C was found in a Los Angeles hotel slumped over as if asleep. The reason is that the lean, the cocktail's second apnea, has claimed too many Southern artists. For Bun B, it wasn't the death of a teammate. That's losing half your soul. He quit drugs completely after that death. But what hurt him the most wasn't giving up lean. It's about being forced to stand alone. You once said, "I never wanted to be a solo artist, but I have to, because our legacy must continue." That's not something someone who wants to shine would say. That's what someone trying to keep the ashes from blowing away would say. And it was from here that the musical fire within Bun B began to wane. He no longer found any interest in music. 3. The terrifying raid. By the time he decided to spend more time with his family, life seemed to slow down a beat. But that peace only lasted until the exact moment the doorbell rang that day. His wife came out and opened the door as usual, still as natural as someone familiar with the rhythm of their own home. And it was that very normalcy that made the next shot bone-chilling. The gun barrel pointed straight at her face, so close that his breath brushed her skin. Everything happened so fast you didn't have time to understand, yet slow enough to etch itself into your memory like a burn. That moment divided his wife's life and Bun B's life into 2 distinct halves. Bun B was upstairs when he heard his wife scream, but it wasn't the scream he was used to. It wasn't the sound of mere fear, but the sound of a life being cornered, the sound of a crack in the chest as life was threatened right before it. That voice struck him like a knife. He felt his heart skip a beat and then pound like a drumbeat in the studio. No thoughts ran through his mind, only the absolute instinct of a man who understood that the next few seconds would decide his life or take it away. He rushed down the stairs as if gravity no longer existed. In his mind, there was only one image: his wife. Not his current wife, but the wife from all the memories that made him the person he is today. The laughter, the morning handshakes, the familiar grumbles, the years she stood by him when everything was in disarray. He knew that if he were a second late, all of that would disappear, not because of fate, but because a stranger with a gun was standing right at the door. The moment Bun B saw the robber pull his wife inside, a feeling that was both cold and hot surged straight into his chest. Cold because he realized he wasn't quick enough to protect her from the beginning. He was hot because the only thing he wanted at that moment was to get back the breath of the woman he loved. It's a kind of feeling that no voice can describe. They call it adrenaline, but anyone who's experienced it will know it's pure fear mixed with pure anger. 2 opposites meet in the same second. No more Trill OG, no more legend, no more rapper. There was only one man left at the moment when there were only 2 choices: stand and watch or rush in. The garage where he parked his car, where the most ordinary things of life were once stored instantly, became a battleground. Bun B doesn't have time to be afraid. Fear comes later. In that moment, he had only one reflex left to get his wife back at any cost. When you pull the trigger, it's not the action of someone showing off their bravery. That was the strongest surge of protective instinct. The shot fired wasn't just aimed at the robber. It was aimed at the moment he felt he could lose everything in an instant. The robber was injured and fled, but it was the silence that followed that haunted him. He heard his wife's breathing, rapid, broken trembling, and it was a sound that pierced his heart more deeply than the gunshot he had just fired. In the few seconds after the robber left, Bun B truly felt fear. Don't be afraid of strangers. And I'm afraid of the feeling of almost losing the woman who has stood by me through every stage. From the days when UGK was still doing small shows, to the evenings I sat in the hospital waiting for news about Pimp C, and even during the times when my career seemed to hit rock bottom. All those memories flashed through his mind like a fast-forwarded tape, and he realized he had never been so close to the brink of losing everything. The media called it a home invasion. It sounds concise, clean, and like an event of the day. But for his wife, it was a door leading straight into a dark period. She's not going back to the old house anymore. Each step on the stairs, each door, every sound in the night was like a reminder of the moment the gun barrel touched my skin. And for Bun B, watching his wife shrink in fear hurt more than any courtroom he'd ever entered. When the final trial was opened in 2024, the intruder was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But that verdict didn't heal the obsession his wife had to carry. Bun B stood before the court not as a legendary rapper, but as a husband who saw his family's peace snatched away right before his eyes. The phrase he said, "She didn't deserve it," is the audible pain of someone who understands that he couldn't be by her side at the most crucial moment. What makes this part heavy isn't the fact that he fired the gun, or that the robber was shot. But the truth is that all the street experience, the Trill OG reputation, the years spent living close to violence, were powerless against the moment a gun was pointed at his wife's head. That's not a hip-hop battle. It's the battle of real life, where titles are useless and survival depends on a single reflex. The Southern rap community, especially the generation that has lived almost a full lifetime, can all relate to this story. They understand the feeling of standing on the brink of losing the person they love in an instant. They understood that the phrase, "she didn't deserve it," wasn't just words. It was the torment of an entire man. And that's precisely why that moment became the most important piece in understanding all the events that just happened to Bun B today. After you've come close to losing everything, once you no longer see anything with the same eyes. 4. From a symbol of pride to the courtroom. Trill Burgers was once seen as a beautiful story, so much so that people believed it was born from the very air of Houston. A rapper who had carried the Southern legacy for over 3 decades was now behind the kitchen counter serving the burger that had the whole country nodding in agreement. When the national television program honored Trill Burgers as the best burger in America, Houston was truly proud. For many, it wasn't just a culinary victory, but also the feeling of one of our own making history. The long lines of people waiting the selfies with Bun B outside the store, the rodeo nights where his burgers sold out, all created the illusion that this time success would have no downside, that this was a gift life was returning after so much loss and pain. But in the old Hollywood style that the 45-70 generation witnessed, the spotlight always casts a longer shadow than we think. And it is precisely in the brightest places that fine but deep cracks are most easily revealed. The event didn't come from the stage or the studio. It comes from statements, internal emails, and numbers as cold as steel. A stray sum of USD $45,000 became the catalyst. One side says the money from Trill Burgers was misused, while the other says they were just trying to navigate a food model that is always chaotic in its early stages. And then the counterattack erupted like a slap in the face to the Southern rap community. The line "Trill Burgers wasn't Bun B's idea" spread so quickly that UGK fans didn't even know how to react in time. For many people, that sentence didn't just touch the burger brand, it touched the entire Trill legacy that Bun B had built over half his life. The outrage doesn't come from right or wrong. but from the feeling that someone just walked into the church and said the main statue doesn't belong to the community. Just as the community was still in turmoil, the court issued a temporary order, an injunction as cold as a wordless sentence. The media immediately ran the headline, "Judge rules against Bun B's Trill Burgers." And even though it was just a procedural decision, most of the public didn't care about the legal details. They only saw the name Bun B next to phrases like misappropriation, breach, and recipe theft. For a rapper who has spent their entire career building an image of being true and real, that feeling is no different from being accused of betraying the very spirit they represent. Houston, which once cheered for burger victories, suddenly fell eerily silent. No one turned their back, but everyone slowed down. It's like when you see a loved one stumble, you don't know whether to help them up or wait for them to get up on their own. Then the appeals court intervened, temporarily suspending the injunction. A part of the community breathed a sigh of relief. Those close to Bun B stated bluntly that this was just a wrong step by the system, and that everything would eventually come to light. But the shadow of doubt still remains. Once your name is in court documents, the numbers are no longer just numbers. They became questions hanging in the air among those who once saw you as the voice of the entire South. The scariest thing isn't losing money or losing a lawsuit, but the feeling of the system stripping away everything you've worked to build for 30 years, leaving only one sentence: prove it. Who are you? The system doesn't need to know if you've stood in the rodeo before tens of thousands of people, if you've taught at Rice University, or if you've rapped with Pimp C. It only cares about paperwork, dates, and signatures. That is the dark side of success, that older audiences understand very well. The brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. Trill Burgers, originally created as a reward after a long journey, suddenly became an arena where all emotions erupted simultaneously: pride, disappointment, anger, fear. And it was the coldness of the business system that exposed what audiences have always known, but rarely confronted in this world. Legacy doesn't protect you from the legal hand. Fame doesn't lighten the numbers on financial reports. And a legend can still tremble from things a young man would never have imagined. What makes this part strong isn't because it's drama, but because it's life. It shows an OG, someone who has overcome lean times, fried years, lost friends, lost groups, and lost peace. Finally having to face the most abstract enemy: paperwork and procedures. No more gunshots in the garage. No more cars on Highway 59. No more lights in the recording studio. Only dense black letters and a system of indifference remain. And it was precisely the cold silence of that system that made people feel choked up, because it reminds the audience that sometimes what knocks us down isn't the storms, but things that seem invisible. That's also why this became the main catalyst for the story, not because it was glamorous, but because it laid bare a truth. Success always has two sides. On one hand, it lifts you up, and on the other, it brings you into the spotlight for people to scrutinize every tiny detail. And just one crack, just the right size, and the silent wall behind you will come crashing down. Bun B is standing right at that crossroads, not falling, but also not moving too fast anymore. I know this system doesn't care who you are. It only cares if you have enough evidence to prove where you deserve to be. And in this moment, the audience understands. Trill Burgers is not just a food story. It's a test of fate, a place where fleeting light collides with enduring darkness, revealing the truest self of Bun B that no media conveyor belt can conceal. 5. The moment the internet exploded. There are moments on the internet that don't need a scandal to go viral. Just a glance, a tilt of the head, or a sentence as sharp as a blade. And Bun B's outburst at Milk, right on the set of The Good Talk Show, was exactly that kind of moment. A minor incident, but it exposed an entire generation and underlying fatigue that only those who survived the 90s rap game could understand. A young Milk thinking that bringing a bottle of wine to the set was like adding a little vibe, a little swagger to make the conversation less dry. But for Bun B, it was like seeing a distorted reflection of himself from 3 decades ago, when he used to smoke, drink, and drift so much he forgot about responsibility, and even how to get home. The way he looked at Milk was exactly like a man who had truly paid the price. A look that suppressed disappointment, but was powerful enough to silence the entire room. Milk raised the bottle to his lips, while the camera was rolling amidst a serious conversation about legacy responsibility and the pressure to stay grounded in a culture full of hidden pitfalls. And right at that moment, something in Bun B clicked. It's not envious anger, and it's not about showing off OG power. It was the anger of someone who had seen too many young people burning the candle at both ends, one flame shining for passion, and the other consuming them. He turned to Milk, not speaking harshly, but the words that came out were like a direct punch: degenerate. A single short, sharp word, no explanation needed. One word was enough to stun Milk, and enough to make the clip the spark that set the internet ablaze. What shook the entire social media network wasn't just the word degenerate, but Bun B's expression. He doesn't smile, doesn't joke, and doesn't play the old teaching young game to get likes. That's the expression of someone who has slid down the very slope Milk is standing on. A person understands that just one wrong habit, a little just for fun, or a disrespectful work session is enough to change the course of life. Older audiences, especially those who grew up with UGK, understand that feeling very quickly. They saw a Bun B who was no longer the 18-year-old boy who smoked so much he lost track of day and night. This is another Bun B, a survivor who emerged from years of decline and is now forced to become a gatekeeper for future generations. Immediately after Milk dropped the set midway, the community's reaction was instantly divided. One side sided with Bun B, calling it a basic lesson about discipline in the industry. They recounted how Bun B had abandoned his lung liver and nerve-destroying habits before they consumed him, just as codeine had taken Pimp C. For them, Milk bringing alcohol onto the set was no different from an act of disrespect toward their profession and toward their own lives. These people see Bun B's actions as a wake-up call, a timely intervention by a truly caring OG. But on the other hand, quite a few young people think Bun B is too intense, too old school, and doesn't understand the fluid vibe of the new generation. For them, drinking on set is just having fun, just keeping the atmosphere relaxed. They believe Bun B is imposing the standards of the 90s on a generation that no longer lives in that context. A constant debate erupted under the clip: is this the seriousness of an OG or unnecessary strictness? Interestingly, both sides are right in their own way. But what many people miss is the emotional depth of Bun B in that moment. It's not just about an uncle getting angry because his nephew drank alcohol, but it's about someone who has endured long, desolate nights, witnessed their friend die for things just for a little fun, and now sees the repeating signs of old mistakes. It's like surviving a house fire, and then years later, you smell smoke in someone else's room. Your body reacts before your mind. That was Bun B's reaction. This moment shows Bun B's transformation more clearly than any interview ever could. You're not the same guy you used to be, living on lean fry and pills. No longer someone who thinks life can fix tomorrow. He went further, becoming the standard setter, the one who said, "Don't go down the path I once did." The one who understood that discipline isn't coercion, but the only way to survive long in this game. At 50 plus, he no longer wanted to witness another young rapper die for stupid things. And scolding Milk wasn't an act of power, but rather a combination of fatigue and responsibility. That event also reflected a bitter truth. Those once considered the wildest generation of hip-hop have now become the group preserving the seriousness of this culture. They used to be lawbreakers. Now they've become lawmakers. It wasn't because they changed their beliefs, but because they paid a high enough price to understand that talent doesn't save the undisciplined. They know how ruthless this industry is when it wants to get rid of you. They've seen too many RIP lines. And in Bun B's eyes, saying a harsh word to Milk was better than having to offer condolences to his family someday. The clip isn't a few minutes long, but it shows one of Bun B's most important moments in recent years. The moment he sided with maturity, responsibility, and what keeps an artist enduring through time. The internet might see it as a little drama, but for those who understand Bun B, who understand the history of Southern rap, who understand the cost of the smoke and fry era he survived, this moment feels like a life cycle coming full circle. A person who once fell for the game is now the one pulling others back from the brink. And that's why that moment exploded, not just with drama, but because it spoke to the maturity of an entire generation of hip-hop. a generation that had lived long enough to know that sometimes scolding is also a form of love. 6. The man was caught in the storm. There are people who spend most of their lives in the noise of the stage, and then at some point they step out of the storm with a strangely gentle demeanor. Bun B is like that now. He still appears in the studio, still stands on the rodeo stage, with the lights swirling around his familiar wide-brimmed hat, still speaks to the Houston community, in the deep, warm voice that has been linked to the memories of an entire generation. But if you look closely into his eyes, you'll see something heavier. A very calm kind of weight, like someone who has tasted enough of life's bitterness and understands that no glory comes without a price. He's still working, but he's not running anymore. He still smiled, but not the way someone who had never experienced loss would. A new album sold out concerts, young artists lining up for his advice. Everything is still there, but they are no longer the peak that you have to desperately hold on to. They're like familiar footsteps, more a part of life than a goal to be traded. Many people say Bun B is in his mature phase, but it's not that simple. He didn't ease into adulthood. He was pushed into it by events that force people to change their attitude toward life. Losing your group, losing your best friend, losing your companion for half a lifetime, losing all sense of security in their own home. When Queenie's screams echoed through that afternoon in 2019, I completely lost faith in the business path when my name was caught between two lines of accusations in a lawsuit that had been going on for years. That's the kind of loss that comes without warning. It came like a shadow over the life of a man who thought he had weathered all the storms of his youth. Trill Burgers continues to expand as if all the disputes and rumors are just temporary noise in the system. But for Bun B, each time he signs a new branch opening permit, the feeling must be different from when he first saw the long line of people waiting to eat the burger he believed would go far back in 2021. Back then, there was the excitement of a new opportunity. But now behind that success are meetings with lawyers, difficult questions about trust and the boundaries between friendship money and responsibility. Success is still there, but it's less brilliant. It leaves you with a dimmer, less glaring light, but one that knows how to illuminate what truly matters. And if you look back at what happened between you and Milk during the recording, you'll understand why Bun B's eyes had that color. When you get angry because a junior is drinking on set, it's not just a matter of professionalism. It's the story of someone who once struggled with all kinds of substances, endured long nights where they couldn't remember what they said the next morning, and witnessed friends, and even their own partner, pay with their lives. When Bun B saw Milk sitting spinning and drinking, he didn't just see a disrespectful act. He saw a road he had once traveled, and he knew where it would lead. That anger wasn't directed at Milk. It was like the anger of someone who had escaped death, seeing signs that future generations still considered a joke. At this age, he speaks less, but every sentence carries weight. The heaviness comes from being awake. He's no longer in a hurry to explain or defend himself. When asked about the Trill Burgers lawsuit, he just smiled and said, "I was built for this." That's not the kind of tough talk to boost morale. That's the quote of someone who understood noise isn't what makes you fall apart. Noise is just the background sound of life. What changed him were moments that seemed small, but left a lasting mark inside. A door opened at the wrong time, a scream from the wife, a name on the court papers, a teammate who will never return. And yet, he continued to walk calmly, not trying to prove anything, not chasing the new to please anyone. He stood like an anchor amidst the noisy current of modern rap games, where a scandal can push an artist to the sidelines overnight. The strange thing is, the more silent he is, the more people respect him, because they sense something rare, unpretentious perseverance. They saw a 52-year-old man who had overcome countless obstacles, yet still maintained that deep, even voice, and still spoke to the community with the humility of someone who had once been at the bottom. When you see Bun B today, you'll understand something familiar, but difficult to put into words. Growing up isn't about gaining more success, but about adding back the things you've lost. And somehow he learned to walk with those losses, without complaining, without revealing them, just gently placing them in his back pocket, like carrying pebbles to remind himself not to forget the past. Finally, as the stage lights dimmed, the question wasn't whether Bun B was right or wrong in the recent dramas, but it's something deeper. Is the light he spent his life building warm enough to soothe the scars life has left on him? Or are there wounds that just lie silently, never truly healing, only able to be lived with? No one knows the answer, but the way Bun B is walking, quietly, calmly, still dedicating all his love to music and community, one understands that sometimes survival is the most beautiful victory in a person's life.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.